So the last caller into Matt Slick's Calm radio show for November 2nd did something special. He demonstrated Matt's failure to understand the flaw in his tag argument yet again, but this time, interestingly, getting Matt to vehemently agree with the core issue, while applying it to something Matt is far more sympathetic to. Before I play the clip, let me explain the issue with Matt's false dichotomy, which is easily seen and remedied with the use of some bracketing. Matt Slick is attempting a disjunctive syllogism using what he touts is a true dichotomy. For the record, when a dichotomy is true, it's simply a dichotomy. There are dichotomies, and then there are false dichotomies. To say a true dichotomy is simply redundant. A dichotomy is something and its negation, so Bert is asleep and not Bert is asleep would be a dichotomy. A disjunctive syllogism is simply a syllogism in which two propositions are joined by an or in one of the premises, such as either I am typing this proposition or I am washing the car, not I am washing the car, therefore I am typing this proposition. With P and Q as the propositions, we can understand this as either P or Q, not Q, therefore P. In his formulation of the transcendental argument for God, or tag, Matt Slick populates his disjunction with what he believes is a dichotomy. This would need to take the form of either P or not P, not P, therefore P, or either P or not P, not P, therefore not P. Matt's formulation is the following. Either God or not God accounts for the laws of logic. Not God accounts for the laws of logic. Therefore, God accounts for the laws of logic. In order to see the problem with this formulation, let's look at a correct disjunction of a dichotomy. Now remember, in a disjunctive syllogism, P is a proposition, not a term. Using brackets for the proposition, we get either God accounts for the laws of logic or not God accounts for the laws of logic. Not God accounts for the laws of logic, therefore God accounts for the laws of logic. The dichotomy is between a proposition and the negation of the proposition, not the terms within. Do you see the difference? If not, I think this should clarify. Consider the proposition, Bert is riding his bike. For a disjunction of a dichotomy, we get either Bert is riding his bike or not Bert is riding his bike. Not Bert is riding his bike, therefore not Bert is riding his bike. The conclusion is the negation of Bert is riding his bike. But in negating a term for the disjunction rather than a proposition, you get either Bert or not Bert is riding his bike. Not Bert is riding his bike, therefore not Bert is riding his bike. The conclusion is not Bert is riding his bike. The difference between not God accounts for the laws of logic and not God accounts for the laws of logic is all the difference in the world. In the first case, it is to say that God does not account for the laws of logic. In the second case, it is to say not God accounts for the laws of logic, aka a cat. Matt Slick has formulated a false dichotomy. The genius is that this radio caller has demonstrated the problem brilliantly using an example Matt is sympathetic to. A non-theist would be a person who lacks a belief that God exists. This person may also lack a belief that no God exists. This person can have no belief one way or the other on the topic of God and qualify as a non-theist. This is a game that atheists play with Matt all the time, so he's a bit sympathetic to the issue. Both Matt and myself would say an atheist would be a person who has the belief no God exists, rather than no belief God exists. So to clarify, we have a non-theist, a person who has no belief God exists. And we have an atheist, a person who has the belief no God exists. We can see the problem again where we deposit God exists or not God exists, as compared to God exists or not God exists. In the first case, we have the proposition and its negation representing a dichotomy. Either is the case that God exists or not the case that God exists. In the second case, we have the proposition God exists and the proposition not God exists. It would be to say that either it is the case that God exists or it is the case that not God exists. Well, clearly we can think of occasions where God and things that qualify as not God both exist at the same time. When you phrase it this way, it's not a dichotomy. Hopefully with continued demonstration, Matt will realize it isn't simply a problem in communication or with being nitpicky about terms. This has disastrous consequences when the person doesn't realize the difference and flips the use in a syllogism as Matt Slick regularly does. I highly recommend he use brackets so as to help him mind his P's and his Q's. And when he does come to realize this flaw such that he can easily spot it when it's committed, perhaps he'll then be able to see why it is that a disjunctive syllogism with a dichotomy is a trivial syllogism to form. Either I am riding my bike or not I am riding my bike. Not I am riding my bike. Therefore, I am riding my bike. The disjunction is window dressing in the case of a dichotomy. A dichotomy is already an implicit disjunction by the law of non-contradiction. So enjoy this listen to this radio show and see if you can follow the caller's point. It's quite funny to see Matt take up the cause we've all been interested in seeing him affirm. And since this is a call-in show, I'll give you some extra laughs with yet more animal content. Cheers, subscribe, like, and thanks for watching, and enjoy.
From Florida, how are you?
Hey, Mr. Slick.
That's me.
Good talk on the Koine Greek stuff. That's usually why I like you, but I had to mute it a few seconds ago just so I didn't have you coming in both ears. But
all right.
Otherwise, it was good. And I was actually going to talk about what Alex Malpass has been talking about with you, I hope, anyway, because I'm just a layman myself, but I feel like I can maybe, I don't know, it feels like he's got his arms outstretched with a bag of goods, and you're just missing it. I want to help, I guess. And
I'm having a little trouble following you. Do you have a question?
Well, I don't know if I have a question so much. I guess my question would be, do you realize that someone like Aaron Ross, those guys that do the kind of atheism is a lack of belief thing, I'm sure you run into that, right?
Are you an atheist? I'm just curious.
I mean, you can call it that if you want. I don't know. I mean, probably agnostic, but, you know.
All right.
Sure.
Okay, so
but I just
go
meant,
ahead.
well, all I'm talking about is how Malpass likes to talk to you about narrow scope and wide scope negation, right? I'm sure you've heard about that with him.
No. What's narrow and wide scope negation?
Wide scope negation is when you negate a whole proposition. For example, non-theism. And then narrow scope negation is when you negate a word rather than the whole proposition. Like atheism.
Okay, gotcha.
Like not God hyphenism rather than not hyphen Godism.
Okay, so what's the point, or what are you calling?
Well, the point is that I think atheists often conflate the two. I think they'll say, atheism's just a lack of belief, and I think that's wrong. And I think that's what you do in your first premise. And I think that's what Alex tries
what
to get
first
on you
premise?
for.
What first premise?
When you say God or not God, that premise.
Well, you know what a true dichotomy is, right? The thing and the negation of the thing. There's no third option.
Sure.
So we have God or not God. We have the case that God exists, or we do not have the case that God exists. It's a true dichotomy, right?
Sure. But
Okay.
I think when you say not God, you say, I'll have it mean atheism or non-theism, either one, because atheists often make that same mistake themselves, and so they'll grant you it.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. But when I talk about the simplicity of just God and not God, you can understand that I'm talking to a radio audience who they may not understand P or not P, therefore not P, modus tonans and things like that, tolans. So, I'm trying to just break it down. And then what happens is a lot of times atheists will say, you didn't say it correctly or technically correct. Well, of course not. It's not the issue. Talking on a radio show.
The problem is by not God, do you mean atheism or non-theism?
Well, you see, what do you mean by not God? That's a question that I would ask them. Because to say not God is a negation of itself, which if you apply mathematical principles, then it's a posit. And then it becomes tautologous.
Yeah, I'm not even talking about the second premise yet. But
Okay.
In the first one where you say God or not God, I think it's ambiguous whether that not God means atheism or non-theism.
I really hope you let me finish my sentences next time, okay?
Okay, I'm sorry.
I was trying to just make a point that this issue of the double negation and the posit then becomes tautologous, God or God. This is what one atheist is tackling on this issue. What I'm talking about is the issue that we either have, to be more simplistic, either God exists or it's not the case that God exists in the universe. Or I like to say it this way, that the transcendental nature of theism versus the non-transcendental nature of atheism, without God as a consideration, either one of those worldviews will account for the transcendental nature of the laws of logic, for example. So these are the basic kind of things. How you word that in symbolic logic properly Well, that's up for a little bit of grab because it has to do with propositions and syllogisms and things like that.
Yeah, I'm not even talking about symbolic logic. They're like atheism, that's just an English word, and non-theism, that's just an English word. But the negations there are different.
Right. Well, atheism has a wide variety of meanings, even among atheists. The strong atheists say, no, there is no God. And then the weak atheist, maybe like yourself, you'll say, I don't know if a God's there or not. That's kind of agnosticism.
Well, I agree. A lot of them are confused. I think honestly, they're to blame for the problem.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
It seems like I'm beating on you. I'm not trying to.
No, I agree with you. And this idea of lack of belief, that to me is an admission by the atheist community when they appeal to, I lack belief. That to me is an intellectual admission of defeat. They have to go to a position that's non-defensible and is not even a position. The position of a non-position. I lack belief. I don't have a position.
Well, they're trying to say, like, a rock is an atheist, right?
When they
but a
say,
rock's just a non-theist.
Well, yeah, see, here's the thing. A theist is an individual. But when they say atheism is a lack of belief, then I say my cat is an atheist, or the rock outside in the front yard is an atheist by that definition. One of the things.
Right.
Okay, go ahead.
No, I just mean I think that's the mistake you're making. I think that you can think of cats as atheists if you conflate atheism with non-theism, right?
Well, what do you mean by non-theism? See, the terms
need
to be defined.
The negation of theism.
But what does that mean, the negation of theism? What does that mean?
Well, it means, like, say you think the word God is meaningless, for example.
I don't think
you're not really an
meaningless.
atheist. I don't either, but there are people that do.
Oh, yeah.
And so you would think, like, all this God talk, it's not that you really don't believe it, it's just they're not really making any sense. That's a non-theistic position, for example.
Okay, now I'm trying to figure out where you're coming from. Okay. And you're right. Actually, I'm kind of surprised you're saying this because you're not a Christian, and I'm not knocking you, but you're saying this. I just didn't expect that. Usually non-Christians that come on and talk to me are hostile, but I'm finding out you're not, so my apologies for that. So I changed my approach here. I'm with you on that. I think a great many of the atheists are extremely inconsistent. Absolutely. They're not consistent in how they think, and when they'll say they lack belief in God, then they behave as though they believe God doesn't exist. So they're just
I kind of think your argument says instead of either atheism or not theism is true, that it says either God or a lack of belief in God is true. It has that conflation of atheism and non-theism.
But a lack of belief, how can it be true? Because what is truth? See, truth is a description of actuality. It's a cognitive statement. I hold the correspondence theory of truth. Truth corresponds to a statement that is either accurate, it's accurate, comports with actuality and or logic. And so I believe all truths are abstractions, require minds. If there are no minds, there are no truths. They're just facts, but then that requires a mind to even say that. So
yeah, I thought about talking that with you too. I'm not, because I mean, you obviously know Greek well, and Plato talks of ideas when he talks of forms.
Right.
And a lot of writers will try to. They don't want you to think something in the head. It's supposed to be like in Platonic heaven somewhere where there's no place or time.
Right. And there's different kinds of Platonists.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, but there are different kinds of Platonists even. So the best that I think an atheist...
True.
There are. The best an atheist can do is to appeal to the laws of logic based on the idea of Platonic norms, which are abstractions which don't require minds. And they'll say they're abstract entities. It gets into some real convoluted stuff and some real sophisticated stuff. And so I've encountered more and more atheists who are my way of illustrating it is there's a craggy cave of darkness and different facets and different areas, and they're backing into various areas and saying, come prove me wrong, as they continue to back away, trying not to hold any real position.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would see that with, for example, with the atheism, non-theism thing. I would think that's playing hide the ball when they say, my cat's an atheist.
Right. I agree with you. I like the atheists who just say, well, I believe there's no God. Okay, let's talk about that. But when I try and get to this propositional issue of God or not God, trying to do it in such a way that it's simplistically understood. God either exists or it's not the case that God exists. And either one of those positions can account for the necessary preconditions for intelligibility. And this is one of the things I'm known for talking about.
I guess my worry is that you're talking to atheists who will make that mistake that their cat is an atheist, so they conflate atheism and not theism. And so when you say God or atheism is true, say, well, wait a minute, maybe neither. But they hear God or non-theism is true, which is true. That's a true dichotomy, as you say.
Then you have to define those terms. And that's why I say I try and stick with the logical requirement of the thing and the negation of the thing. So it's either the case that God exists or it's not the case that God exists. That's a true dichotomy. And so which side would the atheist be on? It's only two positions.
Right,
You had to be on the second.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's all about where the negation goes. I mean, it's
Right.
a famous paper by Russell that people talk about a lot. So that's why I try to think. I think it's really clear where you can see. Think about, okay, non-theism. When you want to negate the whole proposition, theism, that's an English proposition, right? And so you use the English negator non. That
Right.
takes out the whole thing. That's
Right.
just saying you're not a theist, you're a rock. A rock's not an atheist, but you're not a theist. And then atheist, well, that's the Greek theos. It's negating the word, not the whole English proposition theism.
Right.
It's the Greek negator for the Greek word.
Right.
So it's like not God -ism rather than not -godism.
Right. Yeah.
And that's like the stuff about ball and not the ball that Alex was talking to you about.
Right. Modus
That's
ponens,
the
modus
issue.
tollens. Right.
Well, no, it's not about modus ponens and modus tollens. It's just about the scope of the negation, whether you negate a word or you negate a whole sentence.
Okay. Now I'm with. Okay. Yeah. I have no problem with that. Yeah. And when I'm trying to, when I use these arguments with atheists, depending on which variety of atheists I'm encountering, you'll get different objections and different beliefs. So I have to, basically, in order to argue with atheists, not just to argue atheism, but atheism with a variety of epistemic positions. You might get some atheists that are strong to weak, to Platonic, to variations of Platonic norms, of axiomatic presuppositions, of all kinds of things that they will adhere to in a philosophical position that they want to adapt in order to be, well, let's just say more dodgy. So I'm required to know those terms and the refutations of those terms, those positions. I'm
sympathetic with you
It's
when
very
they're,
difficult. Yeah.
being diaphanous or changing positions on the fly or anything like that. But all I really want to get you to understand is that in that first premise, when it's a P or not P, is that P is a proposition. So it's not God or atheism. That's not the right form. It'd be God or non-theism.
I'd say God or not God. P or not
Sure,
P.
but I mean, we were taking God to be a shorthand for a proposition there, if it's going to be a correct
And I would
form.
define God only as the Christian God ultimately, even though a lot of people people would say that theistic versus theism versus non-theism.
If I'm not God, sorry, I don't mean to talk.
It's all right. It's all right. Go ahead.
That happens.
Go ahead.
But I'm going to say, but the way the argument works out is if you want a dichotomy in that first premise, well, when you say theism or non-theism is true. You wouldn't say theism or atheism is true, because
Right.
what if, for example,
Right.
I think God is meaningless?
Right.
That's not one of those positions.
Right. And I have actually a set of propositions I'm working on to put up on the web later, where it's P or not P, and I use theism or not theism. Now, the atheist perspective goes into the non-theistic position. It has to, because it can't be in both when they're mutually exclusive. So that's a logical impossibility.
Because, Alex will say, like, God or not God, what are you saying? He thinks that's weird because you're not using propositions, you're just using, one word to mean a whole proposition. I guess you mean God to mean the proposition that God exists or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, Alex and I can have another conversation, and that's when I'm going to start bringing up the criticisms of his position.
Because I think you want to say, look, atheist, either God exists or he doesn't. And
that's what I say.
The atheist thinks I agree. And the atheist thinks atheism and non-theism are the same thing. My cat, my socks,
not necessarily.
So that's true. Not all of them do, but I mean, whatever.
Right.
There's several that do. And I think you make the same mistake, Matt. I don't mean that to be harsh, but I just mean I think that's where it comes from. And I mean, ultimately, I think it's their fault. So it's not beating up on you, really.
Well, I understand what you're saying. The difficulty that I have is trying to word things in such a way that it satisfies, so to speak, all atheists.
Yeah, because your argument goes, well, God or not God, not God, they're for God.
Right. But it's not. But the not are not the same sense. It's negation of. And I understand what Alex is doing. And what Alex is doing in that is he's kind of playing a game. And I don't mean anything malicious against him. I like him. It's just that that's not the same perspective. Another way of wording it is we have the case that God exists. I don't believe he is.
I don't think he's playing a game. I think the problem is that you say atheist. Either God exists or he doesn't. And he doesn't they hear atheism and non-theism as the same thing. They conflate those two.
Well,
They
I don't know.
think that
Some
God
do.
is in one box and atheism and non-theism as in another one.
Some do.
And then you say it's either one or the other.
Some
and
do.
it's not atheism. And not atheism looks like a good idea because that's a wide scope negation and then a narrow scope negation.
Yeah, I get you. But some do and some don't. Alex is
then
different
the
than
argument
others.
doesn't
Huh?
follow. I'm saying you effectively say God or atheism is true, not atheism is true. Well, then it doesn't follow because non-theism is not atheism.
Yeah, that's why we're working through another way of wording it. That's why I'll be offering the idea, the propositional phraseology of the transcendental nature of, or the transcendence of theism, and the negation of transcendence would be non-transcendence of of without God, of non-theism. Now you have these two categories. One has transcendence and one does not. The laws of logic they're transcendent. Which of the two worldviews can account for the transcendency? Obviously, the atheistic one, the non-transcendency, cannot. Now, then you might get an atheist who says, well, I believe in transcendency and axiomatic norms out of Platonic forms. And, so I have to subdivide every argument for every single atheist out there. And this is what bugs me. I got to do their homework. But they won't even study Christian theology when they criticize it. They don't do any homework. They just negate things that they don't even understand. And I got to correct them on that as well. So my job is 10 times harder than theirs.
Yeah. And I guess I've said my piece. I'll say one more thing and then hopefully open it up for someone else.
Can we quick? I want to give the music's going to start any second, and I want to tell people to go to the Bible study tonight. Okay? Call back tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay, because you're right out of time.
Oh, sorry about that.
Hey, no, it's no problem, man.
Have fun.
Yeah, give me a call. I like talking to you. Seriously. I hope he does call me back. In fact, you should call me at the office. We could talk. Anyway, folks, look, I got to go. The music's going to start any second.